Welcome into the offseason. I'm Cassie Carlson, joined by Dan Wiederer of the Chicago Tribune, and we are now truly in the offseason.
Yeah.
The Bears are on their summer break over the next month and a half or so before training camp. They wrap up their final OTAs, and where we first got the real dose of Ben Johnson, and we start looking into what potentially this team could look like under him in his first year. What were your takeaways from those weeks of practice?
I think so much of this offseason is learning about Ben and what makes him tick and what makes him angry and what makes him happy.
A lot makes him angry.
I think the players are learning that as well. And you obviously start with the details, right? Everybody has talked about that since the first practice that he held at Hallis Hall. And I think it was Cole Kmet who said he's got almost an obsession with the details. And I think that's a fair way to phrase it, because I do think Ben is really locked in. What I think that he brings to the table is some credibility in allowing players to understand why he's so obsessed with the details. He can point to the success they had in Detroit and say, hey, this is what the details unlock. This beautiful world where you can score 68 offensive touchdowns in a season, right? This world where your quarterback can be in a rhythm every single quarter of every single game. And so, look, I think Ben did a great job this spring of putting his fingerprints on things, of establishing standards and expectations. And now it's the players' response that's going to be really interesting to observe, both into training camp and as we get further along the way toward the regular season.
Was there any part of you that was concerned that the obsession with the details, and I think Tyreek Stevens said, the details within the details would not resonate with the players, and that would be so opposite of what they were used to with Matt Eberflus that they couldn't comprehend how to be coached that way?
I think it's so interesting to feel this out over the long term, because I think it's really, really easy as a new coach to come in and establish standards and expectations. It's much, much harder to maintain them and to get guys to buy into it for the first month, and then the second month, third month, fourth month, all the way through the end of the regular season. So that's going to be the challenge that Ben has. I think it's going to be, a learning process for him to understand which buttons he can press and when, which buttons he can press with which players and when. And that's going to be a big part of this team's growth. The one thing that I found refreshing about Ben is that while he's very ambitious and driven, obviously on the surface, you can feel that he's grounded and very realistic with where this team is at, and understanding that there's a long way to go. And even when he made the admission about the offense in the last couple of days of minicamp that we're not ready for primetime yet, I think it was an understanding and an outward expression that looked like we got to really dive in to make the progress that we need to make before we go to the starting gate of the regular season.
He also admitted that Caleb Williams is not fully ready, and they threw a lot on his plate right away. They're kind of learning what he can handle, whether that's length of play call, going back from short to long, or just different concepts that Ben Johnson wants to implement in his offense. And I think that was the one thing that we were all, I don't know if we were all expecting it to be immediate, but maybe we would feel like, oh, this clicked way faster than anyone anticipated. And I think it's maybe a good reminder that, like, hey, we get into this rabbit hole in training camp. We're like, okay, this is looking really good, or okay, this isn't looking so good, but we don't know how it's going to translate on the field come week one. So I feel like maybe hearing that now is like a good reminder that, like, they're still very early on in this process. And over the next month and a half, Ben Johnson is going to go watch all that practice tape and be like, how do we now need to rework this offense so it fits Caleb?
No question. And you used a word there that I've been using a lot, and it's click, right? How do Ben and Caleb click, and how do they continue to work on that click? Because that's going to be the entire catalyst of where they go in 2025. You mentioned it. Ben put a lot on Caleb's plate, on the entire offense's plate, and now's the point to start taking things off and be like, okay, that's too much. They don't like this. We've got to refine our offense around what fits our identity and what our guys do best. That's going to be fascinating to see how he does that, both during the summer break and when they get back into training camp. He was very honest this week in saying, look, like, I'm not going to get fully away from this. I'm going to be in the building. He said the creative juices flow during the summer, and you can start to put some things together. But that click between Ben and Caleb is so instrumental. And I've almost joked this week that we've got to start talking about them as one individual. We've been talking about them as Ben. We've been talking about them as Caleb. Pretty soon it's got to be Ben and Caleb, right? Like, and it's got to be one person who is seeing the offense through the same set of eyes with the same brain, in a way that when we get into the middle of training camp, we go, oh, this is how they're flowing, and this is how the offense is starting to come along.
The final week of OTAs, Ben Johnson said, was meant for young players, and I think a lot of people thought that was going to be rookies only. But there's Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze showing up for the final 3 practices or so. I said it was probably going to be more notable if they weren't there. But I think it definitely does have to make you feel good that Caleb felt the need to be there and be a leader in that sense as well.
I'm with you in the sense that if they were not there, then you'd start scratching your head and being like, why does he not feel like he needs this work? Caleb clearly needs the work. Ben clearly needs the work with Caleb. And Caleb has raised his hand, right, and said, I want to be coached hard. And Ben has said, okay, watch me, right? Like, and that's the back and forth that's going on here. And that's some of what is going to evolve here as they get into training camp. Look, like the intensity of those practices is going to go up, believe it or not. And then you're going to bring in a couple of opponents to do crossover practices in August with the Dolphins and the Bills. And you would expect those scripted sessions to be full of situations that really test Caleb in the offense in a way where Ben can learn something about this football team going towards the starting gate of the regular season. I think August is going to be fascinating to be out there every day, to watch this thing come along and understand, as you said, that this does not have to be a finished product by the time they get to week one, but we do have to have tangible signs that improvement is being made.
Right, that's what I was saying, because week one is daunting, right? You're going to be in prime time, you're going against a division opponent and against a quarterback who you are likely going to be compared to for the rest of your career yet again. Like that whole group of QBs from last year, like they are all tied together for their entire career. I want to move on to Colston Loveland. It's hard to not see him out there on the field because he is your first round draft pick who you are putting a ton of resources in, but he plans to be ready for training camp. He had that surgery back in January. You know, he kind of stands at the podium right now and he looks a little bit small, almost like wide receiver-esque, but the mobility and strength is going to have to be a huge emphasis for him over the next month.
No question, and getting healthy is going to be the biggest thing. When it comes to injury issues, I'm a trust my eyes type of guy, and we haven't been able to see Colston Loveland do anything, so I don't know where he's at physically. He seems to believe he's right on track to be where he needs to be when they start to get going during the preseason. But I made a similar sort of observation in terms of young. Like he looks young, right? Like you look at him compared to Cole Kmet at that lectern and you're like, man, that's a guy who's matured over the last 5 years into a full-blown professional grown man in the NFL, and Colston Loveland's just starting that path out. His separation is going to be what makes him a weapon in this offense. We've got to start to see that in the practices in August, and then we've got to see him develop the chemistry with the quarterback as well, because that's where the security blanket for the quarterback will be so valuable. If you can get that rapport, understand where Colston Loveland's going to be, and then Ben can design it up so that he can get him involved in the offense as much as possible.
Yeah, and he's obviously diving deep into the playbook right now, and Ben Johnson pointed out that Jim Dre, the tight ends coach, has been super impressed with the questions that he's asking that don't make him seem like a rookie. Luther Burden also not on the practice field, and I think that one's a little bit more interesting after Ben Johnson, I think, had some very pointed messaging towards him when he was like, hey, if you're not on the field, you're losing valuable time, not only to get better, but to build trust with your teammates. And I don't know if it's worth noting that, did you pick up that DJ Moore didn't really know his name?
I did take note of that during the minicamp, and it looked like this is a guy who hasn't been on the practice field with his teammates for the last month, and so you are missing time. I thought it was calculated by Ben to make that a very emphatic statement during the final session of OTAs this week to say, look, like this is valuable time that you can't get back, and you've missed that, so now you've got to play catch up. A week prior, he had also been asked whether he was concerned about Burden's setback and his injury, and his answer was, no, I'm not concerned. We have plenty of ammo, which was not like, I'm not concerned about Luther. It was, we've got other guys that can fill in if he's not ready. And so I think there is a little bit of pressure being applied to the rookie on like, look, like it's go time. And once we get into training camp, you've got to understand.
Yeah, and he said he is good to go for training camp. So we'll see what happens there. Who's going to be the Bears starting left tackle?
Right now, like I would probably say Ozzy Trapilo.
Yeah,
look, I think Braxton Jones is going to have a chance to introduce himself into this conversation when training camp begins. We have no idea what Braxton looks like physically. That was a season-ending ankle injury that required surgery. The Bears want him to put on weight so that he can anchor better against bull rushes. Until we see him on the practice field for 2 weeks straight, looking like the Braxton Jones that's made 40 starts for the Bears and can be functional there, I don't know where he's at. Ozzy Trapilo has obviously come in, impressed this coaching staff with his aptitude. He obviously knows how to play the game. Now it's all about adapting to the speed of the NFL game, adjusting to the left side, which he said is a little bit different after the last 2 years at Boston College playing on the right side. And you see a guy that's driven to try to get on the field as soon as possible. So when the pads come on in early August and you start to get in those competitive periods, when you start to have one-on-one pass rush drills against defensive linemen that are coming at you full bore, when you get these crossover practices, that's going to be a big time for both the coaching staff and the front office to compare. What do they have there? If Braxton's there, with Ozzy, with Karan, and oh, by the way, maybe Darnell Wright slides over there for a day or two just to see what it looks like, and the Bears can evaluate from there.
I don't know if this is notable or not because there were so few players at practice the other day when we were allowed to go for the final OTA, but it was Karan Amagaji playing right tackle for the majority of the time because Darnell Wright's not there, and it was Ozzy Trapilo on the left side. So I'm like, okay, what does that mean? But I think you talk to this kid who's a rookie and doesn't carry himself like a rookie, and I think that might be the most impressive part, like his perspective coming out of college, hearing the story about how he was staying after practice, taking extra reps on the left side in case he had to swing to the other side when he knew he was going to play in the NFL one day. Like, I think the maturity level is there for him already. That's also kind of just an offensive lineman thing where they're character guys. Every time we're like, dang, they hit the lottery with the character on Ozzy Trapilo.
He seems polished. He seems prepared. And I think that's what's endeared him to the coaching staff very quickly is that, you know, he comes in and he knows what he needs to work on and he works on it. He comes in willing to be coached, he gets coached, and he applies it. And so now you've got something that you can work with. The physical challenges are going to play out when you get into training camp and you see what it looks like when he's playing against guys that are trying to embarrass him, right? And that's going to happen in August as soon as they get going. And he's going to have to pass that test in order to state his claim to that job. But I think in terms of putting his best foot forward in the spring, he did a great job.
One thing I appreciate about Ben Johnson is he answers questions directly. So when he's asked about who stood out in the offseason program, he literally named out 4 players. And those were linebacker Ruben Hippolyte, who's a rookie. He also said tight end Joel Wilson, Dom Robinson, who's in a crucial year for his career, and then as well as running back Kyle Monungai. Out of those 4 players, who do you envision being a contributor this year?
It feels like every year Dom Robinson is like the May splash guy. And it's like, oh, it's coming for Dom Robinson, and then it doesn't come. And you're like, what happened to Dom Robinson? Right. They're talking about him in the spring. I would probably say Hippolyte because I think the opportunity is going to be there for him quicker. You see him working alongside the other linebackers. Obviously, TJ and Tremaine are going to be your starters in your main defense. And you've got to figure out a way to utilize Hippolyte's speed. It was cool to hear Ben not only answer that question, but to take a day to think about it and give a thorough, comprehensive evaluation of those 4 guys that you just mentioned. And that's another part of the refreshing Ben Johnson experience where you're like, okay, we can actually learn things in this media room every single day if we come prepared to ask the right questions.
Yeah, all right, I'm going to go with Kyle Monungai being the one that's going to be a contributor. I don't know why. I feel like everyone that you talk to about this kid, whether he's a 7th round pick or not, they're like, all he needs is his opportunity and he will take advantage of it. So I'm going to go with the running back playing with DeAndre Swift.
The running game is going to be fascinating to watch that evolve because that's Ben's bread and butter.
Yeah.
As fancy as his offense can be, it starts with being able to run the ball effectively, efficiently, and consistently. We'll see what his vision is for all these guys now with Monungai, with Roschon Johnson, and obviously with DeAndre Swift.
All right, we've got plenty more to talk about when it comes to quarterback Caleb Williams. How much pressure will come with his 2nd season in Chicago? And later, Ozzy Trapilo joins the show to discuss his transition to the NFL. We are talking all things Bears as they are now officially in their offseason and summer break before training camp at the end of July. And I felt like this past week you turned on the TV and it's all the national media talking about football and what are the storylines going to be, right? Outside of Aaron Rodgers now that he is the storyline of the offseason. And they were talking about quarterback play. And there is a group of 4 quarterbacks in Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, and J.J. McCarthy. Who are tied together for their entire career. Now, the big question this week seemed to be who has the most pressure on them heading into their 2nd season. Some would argue Caleb Williams because it didn't work out for him in his rookie season, and Jaden Daniels went off to be the rookie of the year. Others are saying J.J. McCarthy because he's also in a ready-made situation in Minnesota coming off an injury. Do you feel like Caleb has the most pressure externally on him?
I'm part of the Caleb group. I am, because I do think when you're taking number 1 overall, there's expectations that you make your presence felt by the end of year 2, that you show the league that you are a for real quarterback. And Caleb's got to do this in a period where he has had to reboot with a new coaching staff, with a new offensive system, with some new pieces around him. The pieces they put around him are all pluses, right? And that should help Caleb get off the ground here in 2025. But there's no question that his progress throughout the 2025 season will tell us a lot about the direction of the entire Chicago Bears franchise. And for that reason, I think there is a healthy amount of pressure on his shoulders. And I think he will embrace that. And I think he and Ben will put their heads together to try to maximize that.
I'm in agreement that I think no question that he has the most pressure on him. Not only is he the number 1 overall pick last year, but it's who they hired in Ben Johnson, that they brought him in. He wanted to come here, and a lot of that was because of their quarterback in Caleb Williams, trying to unlock this guy who a year ago we were talking and calling him a potential generational talent. And then after the season, he goes through multiple coaching changes, not hiring the right offensive coordinator for the job. There starts to become more questions. And it's being in comparison with Jaden Daniels, who has Cliff Kingsbury and like almost a makeshift offensive line in a lot of ways too, with what they pieced together in Washington, going out there and balling out and taking him to the playoffs.
He
like,
plays
how does
for
that
the
happen?
NFC Championship, right? And you see kind of how quickly it can come when you're in the right situation. And so now the Bears have to create the right situation for Caleb. Here's the scary part, and are you ready for this? Like, we may not know if Caleb Williams is for real for another 2 years.
Yeah.
And this is not to bring up the past, but we did not know for sure after Mitch Trubisky's second year, even though there were signs of promise that he was moving in the right direction, that he was for real. Same thing with Justin Fields. And eventually those two guys kind of flamed out here in Chicago. And so we will know quicker if Caleb is not the answer than we will that he is the answer. And so this is going to be a really interesting year to see him have the flashes of success that we all expect to come, and then to deal with some of the bumps in the road. Obviously last year, the 10-game losing streak wore on him. Mm-hmm. You saw it on the sideline. You saw it in the media room with us, that there was a fatigue that came with that. There was a frustration. There was a little bit of a morale dip. And he, I think, now understands, with Ben Johnson guiding him, that you've got to project confidence and certainty every single day. And you've got to do that in a consistent manner that includes body language, which we heard about earlier this offseason, in a way that makes everyone around you believe that you're headed in the right direction.
Well, and I think it's like when you rewatch everything that went down last year, like you think of those clips of him like getting sacked and laying on the field for an extra 5-10 seconds, right? Slumped on the sidelines. Or Shane Waldron laughing next to Caleb Williams, who now we know was like obviously annoyed at the situation. Like, that all makes sense of why Ben Johnson doesn't want that to be the culture or the identity of this team. And I loved his quote of, you don't want to be a palms up team. Like, it's a sign of weakness. Like, you should be going in prepared to win every game. And I don't feel like they felt that way last year. And they weren't set up for success starting with their coaching staff necessarily. Yeah,
no question. And you've got Bo Nix as part of this second-year quarterback group, and Michael Penix. And that's going to be a class that is linked together, as you said. Caleb experienced some hiccups during the spring, as we expected. And Ben, I think, was forward in pointing them out on occasion, both on the practice field and when he spoke to us. And I think that's part of bringing a young quarterback along, is getting them to understand that these flaws are there for the world to see. And so you've got to address them right away, and you've got to understand that there's no place to hide if you're QB1 in a market like Chicago with the weight of pressure and expectations that are on this franchise. And so I do think that was established this spring, that this is it. Like, this is center stage, kid, and you better be ready for everything that comes with that responsibility.
Yeah, you asked for it. So say with the schedule that, they have Vikings, they go Lions, and what's week 3? Is that Dallas? That's Dallas, right?
Yeah.
Dallas coming to town.
And then off to Vegas before the bye week.
Okay, so say those first 4 games, like, you go 1-3. Like, are you, how do you digest that, right? As a fan, how would you tell fans to digest it? And also as an evaluator of football, being like, all right, are you looking only at quarterback play at that point? Or are you looking at, all right, where are the holes on this entire team?
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at the comprehensive picture, and I think there has to be a different internal view than there will be in the outside world, because 1-3 is not going to resonate here in this city when we get to the bye week at 1-3.
It's plausible. I feel like
very much so.
Yeah,
very much so. And so Ben is part of a building program in Detroit where it didn't start out that great when Dan Campbell arrived. And they did have a bad first season and a really bad start to season 2, which was the year they eventually took off. And so you just got to be consistent with your messaging and understanding where the targets are for each individual player, each individual unit, and the team as a whole. That's going to be fascinating to watch. And you mentioned the schedule. I go down the road schedule. Lions, Raiders, Commanders, Ravens, Bengals, Vikings, Eagles, Packers, 49ers. Where's the
playoff
road
teams
game that makes you breathe, right? Like, you're like, oh man, like, that is a really challenging road slate to find 3 wins on the road for this Bears team. And then it reminds you, oh yeah, this team has a long way to go to close the gap on some of these great teams.
I don't know that we've asked you, are you taking the over or under on win total, 8.5?
When the schedule was announced, I put them down for 9-8. I felt like I had to really, really work to find that 9th win. Last year I had them at 9-8 going into training camp, and I actually elevated the bar to a 10-win team when we were leaving camp. How wrong was I? Right now, I'm kind of on that 8-9 fence, and I want to see what training camp looks like to kind of reassess that.
All right, you're not placing your bet till after training camp?
Yeah.
All right, I already placed my bet on the over, so it's like, all right, we're going for 9-8. Dan Wiederer, thanks for coming on the show.
You got it.
All right, still to come, I go one-on-one with Bears rookie offensive tackle Ozzy Trapilo, who talks about battling for the starting left tackle job and his connection to the historic Doug Flutie Hail Mary. We are joined now by rookie Ozzy Trapilo. You just are finishing up your first offseason in the NFL. So what's it been like from a rookie perspective?
Yeah, it's been really great. A lot kind of thrown at you between meeting all the guys, the playbook, going out there practicing. But it's been a really, really awesome experience. I think getting to sort of see what the NFL is like. It's, this isn't full padded by any means, but it's a good taste of what's to come.
Everyone was really impressed when you stepped up to the podium one of your first weeks, and you were like, in college, I actually practiced on the left side too, just to make sure I was prepared for whatever would possibly come your way.
Yeah.
Now you're rotating with the ones at left tackle, and Ben Johnson really touted your mental toughness and being able to kind of consume everything. What do you feel like prepared you the most to be able to handle that workload so early on?
Yeah, I think, the coaches at BC did a great job. Coach Applebaum, my old O-line coach, he really did a good job playbook-wise with the entire O-line, putting a lot of emphasis on, the minor details and making sure that we're really keyed in, because a lot of that translates to the NFL. And then the coaches here have also done a great job installing it all. It's not like they're just throwing it all at you. They sit down, they teach it, any questions get answered. So I think just overall, it's been taught to me very well, so it's easy to learn.
What stands out about Dan Rochar as a coach and the way he teaches?
Yeah, he's a really great coach. He's demanding in a way that you want a coach to be. He's not just going to scream your head off for no reason. He's demanding, and he wants to get you better. That's the job of a coach, to bring out the best in his players. So he's really, you can see it every day. He puts everything out there. He does his part to make this team better, and it's our job to follow suit.
Anyone you've gravitated towards in that O-line room? I'm sure you've maybe looked over a few times and been like, dang, that's Joe Thuney standing next to me.
Yeah, to be honest, all the guys are awesome. I don't know if it's just an O-line thing, but every O-line room I've ever been in, everyone's awesome. So it's really a great room of guys, great group, great leaders, guys that have experience in this league for a long time, like Joe Thuney. And yeah, they're all willing to help. They'll go that extra mile to make sure that you're in the right spot.
All right, I heard a really cool story. Your dad, Steve Trapilo, played at Boston College, like you, an offensive lineman, and it was Tom Waddle, former Bears receiver, who also played at BC. He's like, you got to ask Ozzy about his dad holding up Doug Flutie in an iconic photo after the Doug Flutie game. What have you learned about, your dad playing at BC? And I'm sure you've heard stories about that game in particular.
Oh yeah, they call it the miracle in Miami. So, I've seen clips of it countless times, but Hail Mary gets thrown end of the game. They catch it, and he grabs Doug Flutie, lifts him up, and that's kind of the iconic photo. So yeah, in terms of things that I've learned, I guess, create a legacy, and the way that they did, that team especially, I think that team was, it made its mark. That's something that's still talked about today. So any chance that I get to do that, I'm going to do my best to do the same. So.
Ben Johnson said that training camp is not a get-in-shape camp, it's a show-up-in-shape camp. Has he shared that with you guys in team meetings?
He has, yes.
So over the next month and a half or so, what have you learned that you need to go attack to make sure you're prepped for your first training camp?
Yeah, you can't take time off, a day or two, whatever, but you can't just go home and sit around for a couple weeks. You need to go home and continue to get better, basically. The same stuff we're doing here, you can't just go and stop playing football. You got to keep working on your technique, keep working out, make sure you stay in shape so that we don't show up and it takes a few days for everyone to sort of pick up the slack that they left during the break. We want to hit the ground running.
Ben Johnson seems very black and white, in what his expectations are for each player, each position. And he said when it comes to left tackle, basically whoever's going to win the job is going to be the best pass protector. How do you hearing it laid out for you pretty plain and simple from your head coach that if I'm going to win this job, this is what it's going to take?
Yeah, that's the main goal. So every rep that I get at practice, just going to go out there and do the best I can in the off season, especially in these coming weeks. Make sure I keep continuing to get better. And yeah, just try to help the team in the best way that I can.
You're in a position where when the pads come on, that's when your time will really come in training camp. So who are you most looking forward to lining up against on that D-line?
Yeah, I think everyone. I want to single anyone out. I know. But again, the pads haven't been on these last few weeks, so when they come on, I'm just excited to experience the NFL and what that full speed is like.
Anyone already chirping at you?
Yeah, there's always no one in specific. O-line, D-line, there's always something going on in a good way.
All right.
So
good stuff. Ozzy Trapilo, I appreciate your time.
That's it for this week on the Offseason. Make sure to check out our full shows and extended interviews on Fox Local or our YouTube page. The Offseason is now available on Spotify, Odyssey, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.